Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Sebastian. I'm one of the presidents for Identity, which is Columbia College of Dental Medicine's LGBT student organization. And yeah, this is actually one of our very first events. And we tried starting up the chapter earlier this year, but obviously due to COVID, we really couldn't do too many things. I think the one thing that we did was we had like a drag race viewing party, which was really social and really fun. And so we thought that especially for Pride, we'd have like a more, down to earth kind of conversation about really what's going on now and tying it back to how it relates to the LGBT community. Libby, did you want to just introduce yourself as the other co-pres?
Yeah, so I am Libby. I'm the other co-president. I do see some new faces or names on here that I've never met. I'm a rising D4, so if you don't know me, then welcome. This is a good space for you to be in and to join, and we're excited to have you with us today. In addition, we do have one non-Columbia interloper, and that would be Dan Walker. They are from the University of Washington over in Seattle, and that is where the organization Identity began. They started it on their own there and then spread it kind of to us, so we are the offspring of this little org. So we're trying to get started. So welcome to Dan.
What's up, Dan? Oh, and before I introduce our main kind of facilitator, I want to get a picture of whoever has the video. So if anybody wants to just turn on the video for now, or if you don't feel comfortable, obviously that's fine. Go, what's up, Michelle? Okay, what's up, Alyssa? Okay, cool. So let's take a quick little picture. Love it. All right, so without further ado, we're gonna all try to facilitate the conversation, but I think our main facilitator is Kyle. So go for it, Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you, Seb. I'm Kyle. I'm the education chair for Identity. Happy Pride. I hope everyone's having a meaningful Pride this month, even if it's from home, socially distanced. We wanted to put together this event in honor of Pride, in honor of recent events around the country. So basically the way this event is going to work is we're going to be showing some clips from an organization called Equality Florida, which is a political advocacy group that advocates for civil rights and protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer residents of Florida. But this panel had some really interesting stuff. They're a panel of people that are both Black and queer. And so basically, we're going to just start off with an introduction, which is at the beginning of the video, to kind of set the scene for what the video is about, and then watch some more clips. And basically, the point of the session is for it to be a dialogue and a discussion. For those that are comfortable, speaking, we welcome all voices and contributions. The one thing I just asked is maybe just have yourself on mute for most of it, and then once, if you'd like to say something, just unmute yourself and feel free to speak. And yeah, so Libby, if you wanted to maybe share the screen, and we can start off with the introduction to the video.
Of course, and then if anyone is joining late, we do have an attendance sheet in the comments if you didn't already see that, so you can go ahead and just sign that you were here.
So the 152.
Hello.
Am I good? Yep, okay.
I'm Nadine Smith, Executive Director for Equality Florida, the state's LGBTQ advocacy organization, and I want to introduce our interpreter for the evening, Kaylee Collins. Thank you all for joining us, and I encourage you that while you're watching now, please invite your friends and family to tune in. And even more importantly, I hope you'll also share your thoughts and your questions in the live stream on Equality Florida's Facebook page. When we began to envision this panel weeks ago, George Floyd was alive in Minneapolis. Tony McDade had not been shot by police in Tallahassee. We began the planning in the aftermath of Ahmaud Arbery's killing by white vigilantes just 2 hours over the Florida border. We'd organized an LGBTQ response in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin's murder, and the echoes were unmistakable. We also wanted to draw attention and outrage to the epidemic of Black transgender women being murdered, including 7 transgender women murdered in Florida in less than 2 years. And we wanted to ensure that when people say Black Lives Matter, and they should, that they truly meant all Black lives matter. And finally, with Pride Month approaching, we really wanted to reassert June as a commemoration of a street rebellion against hate violence and unchecked police brutality. We wanted to be one of the voices that said enough is enough, that the normalization of police brutality, so normal that the presence of video cameras did not save George Floyd, had to be challenged, and LGBT voices had to be part of challenging it. And finally, we wanted to amplify the voices of the Black LGBTQ experience, we who live in the intersection of identities, with the added danger that racism and anti-LGBTQ hatred puts in our path. And now this conversation comes as people have taken to the streets, where the brutality that is a common occurrence in Black neighborhoods is now on display for the entire nation and the entire world. America is at a crossroads. In the words of demographer James Johnson, we are a country in a demographic convulsion, a nation increasingly of Black and brown people, young Black and brown people, and older white people. And the shifting demographics have created a panic that expresses itself not only in the words and obvious actions of white supremacists, but also in the fear and discomfort and silence of white people who see that shift and wonder what it might be like to be no longer be numerically the majority, but instead part of a pluralistic society, what it might mean to be a minority in a country that has not treated minorities well. So it was with that spirit that we began this conversation, that we invited these panelists. And in this context, we think it is critical that the LGBTQ community be vocal and visible, unafraid to say the words white supremacy, unafraid to speak out to end the violence, state-sanctioned and hate-sanctioned, against the Black community, and to remember that this is our fight. We do not show up to it as allies, but we understand that our liberation, that our freedom is tied to ending this system. So with that, I'd like to invite our guests to join us. We were going to be joined and will be joined later by Minneapolis City Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins. The murder of George Floyd occurred in her ward, and so obviously she's at the center of much of what is happening right now. I'd also like to bring up Alfonso David, who is the president of HRC, Imani Rupert Gordon, the executive director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and Michelle Rayner, who is a civil rights attorney who has been at the forefront when these kinds of vigilante killings, this kind of police brutality occurs. She is one of those civil rights attorneys who gets the phone call. So obviously this is a week that has roiled the nation. And Alfonso, let me turn to you to share your thoughts on where we are, why it's important for us to collectively have issued this statement, and where we go from here.
Libby, do you want to go to 7:30 now?
Yep.
Thanks.
Ask people to really think about how they could see beyond themselves. Because if we are going to achieve liberation, if we're going to achieve equality and have that equality be sustainable, we have to see beyond ourselves. We have to care about issues that don't directly affect us. That is how we achieve equality. If we're pushing for policy solutions because they directly affect us. If we only care about legislation because it affects our family members. If we only push for specific initiatives because it affects people that we know or who we know. we will never get to that place where we achieve equality and have it be sustainable. Yes, we win pieces of legislation. Yes, we win cases in courts of law. But we need to get to a place collectively where we can achieve equality. In this past week and a half now, where the country has been reeling from just the plight of Black people in this country, I am hopeful that this is an opportunity where people can indeed see beyond themselves.
Great, and maybe 9:05, and then after that, we'll break the talk a little.
Oh, and Libby, sorry, Libby?
Yep.
Could you speed it like to 1.25?
Sure.
Just so it's a little, yeah.
Thanks, Seth.
I hope this is 1.25. I can't see. Oh,
That's,
no.
yeah.
My little box of people was in the way.
Honestly, I'm excited to talk about this subject because, thinking about the intersection of LGBTQ identity and racial justice is a popular topic this week. It's a popular topic for some of us every week, and the complexities that come with experiencing discrimination at multiple levels. It's not novel; it's a reality that many of us navigate every day. And though intersectionality has become a buzzword, a catch-all for everything, we don't always do the best job of explaining what that is. To be intersectional isn't the understanding that it's hard when someone has multiple marginalized, underrepresented identities. Intersectionality is looking at the systems in place that were created for everyone to thrive and get to liberation. It's an intersectional fail when someone falls through the cracks or doesn't receive benefits or cannot properly access supports because the systems weren't created for them. And we're at this moment right now where collectively our communities are recognizing this and demanding justice at the same time. And this is what's going to happen when a community is consistently left out of systems that translate to other negative outcomes. And this has happened historically. So, right now it's all too common for us to see Black people killed by the people that have sworn to protect us. And we know that Black transgender people, especially trans women of color, are being murdered with very little investigation going into these murders. And most of them are going unsolved. But not only that, we see trans people being misgendered then after death. And so all of these things it's something that we're considering. And so I'm excited to have this conversation now because it's been too long, it's just too much, and something special is happening now. And we've seen something like this before, and so I'm excited to see where our community takes us.
Thank you. All right, so why don't we just pause from the video for a little bit and start chatting a little, and just maybe if you decide to share something, just maybe introduce yourself and what your pronouns are. So the first sort of question that was on my mind is, why is it sort of important, as was said in the video, for us to think about causes that aren't necessarily, something that we're personally involved with or having personally been a victim of. I think of different examples in queer movements where people have been involved in things that was both for themselves but for other people. And so if anyone has any thoughts about that, that would be great. One other sort of related point that was talked about was this concept of intersectionality, and how, oftentimes people feel like they have to have the hierarchy of their identity, whereas, they can't be Black queer, but have to be Black and queer. And so, I think one thing that's been on my mind is how it's important for us to, as people of the LGBTQ community, to fight for, helping solve racial injustice, because there's sort of no, as I kind of said, liberation until everyone achieves liberation. And so we kind of have to make sure that when we're fighting certain fights, that everyone is a part of it, and that no one feels like they have to prioritize a certain part of themselves, because it's at the intersection of every aspect of our identity that makes up who we are, and we define that for ourselves. So for any movement to not be supportive of that, or having that in mind, won't kind of achieve the best outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to go off of that. So speaking about intersectionality makes me wonder, like, what would, where would we be today if, like, the LGBT movement started with, like, gay white males being the ones who were, like, starting the fight? Would they be fighting for the LGBT community, or would they be fighting for, like, the white gay male experience of being allowed to, like, be in a gay club and things like that? Would women be allowed into that space? Would transgender people be allowed, non-binary people? So it makes me wonder, like, would it have been, like, so different if it would have been like, oh, so now being gay and white is okay, and then, like, it would have taken, like, 2 decades for, like, being a lesbian, and then, like, 50 years for, like, transgender people to be okay. So it's almost like I'm so thankful that it was a Black woman, like, trans woman, who, like, really started this movement in America, because it literally started, like, right at the, like, every single intersectionality, you know what I mean? So nobody can say, like, oh, we'll talk about trans stuff later, you know what I mean? Oh, we'll talk about, like, people of color stuff later, because we're talking about everything now. And thanks to Marsha P. Johnson, right, and so many others for, like, starting that battle. And honestly, like, then I started thinking, and sorry for talking so much, and I started thinking that police probably wouldn't raid a white gay male club in the first place. So it'd probably just go straight for the, more oppressed kind of group of people, right? So, like, it only makes sense that the person who threw the first brick was not a white gay male. It was, like, an actual trans woman of color. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And even today, we're still fighting in so many ways for people within the LGBTQ community who are most marginalized. As you said, it probably would be even worse off than it was if it weren't for people like Johnson. And but we've still got a long way to go, especially when it comes to transgender and other gender minority people. So that's a great point that you bring up. Anyone else have any thoughts about intersectionality or why this fight is so important?
Well, I was just gonna ask everyone here if they understand, like, what intersectionality is, because I know it's used a lot, but then, like, people don't really go in and explain what it is. Like, does someone want to, like, talk about what that is and what that means?
Or is anybody confused about what it means?
Yeah. Well, I can explain it. So in case you didn't want to speak up, but because I didn't know what it was until, like, I had to, like, take a course, and then, like, this course I took in undergrad kind of, like, dove into it. So I was able to, like, become more knowledgeable, I guess, about, that term and the implications of it. But basically, like, I like to think of it as, like, race and gender and sexuality and class as, like, separate circles on a Venn diagram. And then wherever those circles overlap, that's a completely different identity. And, like, wherever those circles overlap in all the different areas are completely separate and unique identities that are very different from one another. And so people fall, like, all over where these circles overlap. And those experiences that someone has is very unique to just being on another side of the diagram. So if someone is Black and if someone is transgender, their experiences are very different than someone who is Black and transgender, because they are seen differently, and they are seen as they experience different challenges that someone that is just Black or just transgender would experience. So then I think it's important to know, and what they talked about in the video is that because you are, you identify as multiple different different circles, and you fall in this in-between place, that your experience is different and is valid and is something that needs to be talked about, because people don't understand that, like, just like by being a combination of things that you know, need like more support from the community, or you know, face something that other people may not even understand.
For sure. And kind of what Seb was kind of saying earlier, the importance of every queer space to be mindful of that, you know, in every way, such that no one ever feels like the space for them is not for them. Otherwise, there's no liberation, there's no kind of moving forward. It's very stagnant if that's not being kept in mind at all times.
I have one thing to add. I think that when I think about intersectionality, I always end up thinking about, once the discussion starts, how these people who define themselves by whatever you want to define yourself as, whatever groups you want to put yourself in as, there's a lot of people that are different than you that are fighting a different fight. And that's because just socially and culturally, we build ourselves up, and not everyone, but we have been built on this system of hate. And there's just so many different, when you start to think about intersectionality, you can realize that there's different levels that can build onto someone's plate of levels of hate. And sometimes people identify and define themselves by who they hate, which is just crazy when you think about that someone's trying to identify themselves in how they feel about other people. So I just always think back to, you know, why is it so important that people express themselves and have the space to do that? And it's because they haven't, or because they feel or recognize the hate that we have as a society, and that just surrounds them.
And at the risk of like beating a dead horse, I think one of my favorite conversations about intersectionality kind of deals with this identity of passing, because there's like a bunch of different types of passing, but I don't think you can have intersectionality without acknowledging the fact that like you could be in the same exact groups as someone and have a completely different stigma attached to you just based on passing levels. So say you're a lighter skinned Black person, or someone who's white passing but Hispanic, or someone who's further along in their transition, someone who's non-binary, and everybody passes a different way to societal norms and standards. So everybody has a different experience just based on that, but it doesn't necessarily make them any more or less that group. It's just a different experience. So I think intersectionality is like largely predicated upon acknowledging passing and its existence interwoven between these groups.
Isa, would you mind starting? We're going to have everyone just say your name, class, or how you got into this call, and then your pronouns. We're just gonna do that for everyone that chooses to speak, beyond just the people who have already introduced themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Isa. I'm a D2, I guess now, and pronouns she, her.
Thank you, Isa. That's great. Okay, Libby, do you want to maybe now go back to the video to the 20 minutes, 18 seconds mark? We'll take a look at some more clips.
Yep, definitely.
When we think about structural change, I know that we immediately go to representation, and representation is important and it can move us forward, but when we mistake presence for power, that leads us to trouble. What we can't do is have put a Black person or a trans person or a person with a disability or a woman or people with these intersecting identities in a position of leadership and thinking that that's going to be the answer. Having a liaison from a social identity is not going to be how we get to victory, and it only sets people up when these systems don't change. These hires can be a starting point, but we know that it has to be larger than that. We have to think about what is actually going to get us to structural change. We have to be thoughtful about how our systems are hurting people and who we're actually helping in the work that we're doing. And if anything is disproportionately impacting any of our communities, then that's a hint that something else is at play. There's something else we need to look at. If the criminalization of sex work is disproportionately locking up queer and trans people of color, then that's something that we need to examine. Or Black and brown communities are having negative health outcomes, and those are exacerbated by our LGBTQ identities, and that's something we have to examine. What we have to do is make a commitment to ask these challenging questions, listen to the answers, believe the people that are saying them, and then be prepared to change. We have to know that sometimes we are going to be the first person we're going to be the first person, the first institution, the first organization to do something. And so there might not be a precedent for it, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. In fact, that actually might mean that it's right. For some people, not including a formal education requirement on a job description would be unfathomable. But for some of us, we know that people with a lived experience are closer to the people we serve, and that's going to put our teams in a better place and better able to support folks. And we have to really avoid getting in the way, like being distracting, really be thoughtful about the ways that folks try to distract from movement, and really making sure that we're concentrating on the issue at hand. Because a tactic that has always been used against our communities is to challenge how something is being done and ignore the actual problem that's happening. Right. These are things that we have to think about when we want to create substantive change in our communities. It's not just putting a person in a position of power. That's not it at all. We have to actually change the culture. We have to shift the paradigm there.
Michelle, you got animated there. What were you thinking about?
No, I mean, when Amani touched on the part of, when it's, the what is happening as a result of the actual foundational issue, and we've seen it just now, the Attorney General in the state of Florida is more concerned about property than actually being concerned about a Black man being killed. And so for me, if I can just be very transparent, it's very nice that these organizations signed this letter. I think that it's wonderful. But my question becomes, what are your action items, right? How are you going to really begin to look internally? And I think Alfonso and Amani touched on this, really begin to look internally at the bias that you have, maybe the underlying racism that you have, and really begin to interrogate that and really begin to do the work. Because I'm glad that you signed a letter, but then when I'm sitting in front of some of these folks that may have signed this letter, and you begin to then discount my experience as a Black woman, as a Black lesbian woman, when you begin to discount my experience about how the way that you move in your organization may move in the world, how it affects my people, and I mean total my people, Black folks, gay, lesbian folks, my people, totally, then to me, the letter means as much as the piece of paper or the email that it sent. So I think it's great. I think that's a step, but I feel like that should have happened because there's folks that are sitting on this panel even well before me that have been challenging that to these organizations, right? So that's kind of my position. What are your action items? What are the things that you're going to do to stand in solidarity with us? And not just solidarity in a letter, but are you going to be a comrade? Are you going to come out and put your body on the line? Are you going to put your money where your mouth is? Are you going to really stand with us in this moment? Because I don't need you to write a letter. I need you to put some action, to put some boots on the ground, however that may look.
So what does that look like? Alfonso?
There's so many different ways. We have so many different organizations and institutions, and how they function all differ. You have direct services organizations, advocacy organizations, political organizations. And what I would say is there are a number of different portals that leaders and executive directors should look at when they think about institutional systemic change. One, of course, is the work. Where are you placing your priorities? And how are those priorities affecting certain groups of people? And this also ties back to the initial point I was making. It's very difficult, just as human beings, for us to think about donating to an organization or an institution if we have no direct link. So I understand the sensitive it is for some to say, well, why should we focus on that issue when the majority of our supporters don't reflect that demographic? The reason why that's important is because, again, if we don't focus on the marginalized, we will never achieve full equality. And if you need to think of that from a selfish perspective or self-interested perspective, fine. But I think from a moral perspective, it's important for us to really take a step back and invest in programs, approaches, initiatives that actually directly affect the marginalized. And so that would be the first thing I say that organizations should do. Second, I think just taking a step back and thinking about the institutional structure that exists and just simply evaluating whether or not that system needs to be revised, needs to be reviewed, training is great, and people often talk about, well, we're going to do competency training, we will do diversity training, and I think that's great, but you have to look behind the curtain and really get a sense of whether or not you have institutional fractures within your organization or institution in order to solve those problems and actually create an environment where people can succeed. So I would say it's a little bit of both, really thinking about the programmatic work and the institutional administrative work and creating a path forward to change.
You know, one of the things when people are reaching out to me and asking what they can do in this moment, you know, the thing about systems is they're intimidating. They have so many tentacles. They can cross you in so many different ways. But right now, with the attention that is focused on the normalization of police brutality, I think the most important step that all of us collectively can take is to challenge the systems within law enforcement. The mass incarceration, not just the killing of Black people, but that constant stop and frisk, humiliation, provocation, because what's spilling out in the streets right now is George Floyd is a catalyst, but it is the boiling over of that constant, nonstop flexing of power without consequence. And right now, what people are seeing is a level of accountability, a demand for accountability, a requirement that we're not going to look away. This isn't new. There are plenty of George Floyds who nobody had a camera rolling when he was murdered or she was murdered. We saw in this past week the
Thanks, Libby. Okay, great. That was some great stuff in that clip there. One thing that the panel sort of touched upon, which was concrete, actionable ways that people can contribute to fighting racism. Can anyone maybe think of anything that's been on their mind, especially recently, about ways to contribute to anti-racism, particularly in thinking about things not just now during the height of the movement, but long-term? And another sort of thing to think about is a particular role as health professional students, as dental students, in contributing to anti-racism.
You're having a little tough here.
Picking up there.
This kind of answers maybe the last question more so, if that's all right. And for everybody who doesn't know me, my name is Brittany.
I think it was coming through, but then it broke up again.
I think that we lost Brittany.
Okay.
But hopefully,
Brittany, if we'll keep an eye out if name comes back.
Am I?
Oh,
yeah.
Am I back?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly now. Go ahead, Brittany.
So I was just saying, my name is Brittany. I'm a now fourth-year dental student. My pronouns are she and her. I just had some thoughts that I kind of wanted to share with the last question, and I suppose I didn't really speak up, but I've really been thinking about the question of, like, why should anybody care, just in general, about whether it's racism or sexism or homophobia, like, if you are not within that group, why should we care? And I think it kind of comes down to the fact that all of these sort of institutions are really based upon, like, power, power differences. And it's easy for us to get comfortable when we aren't currently in that space that's being affected by the power difference, like myself included. I'm even guilty of this, where it's like, well, so I'm Black, and I'm like, well, I'm not from one of the rougher neighborhoods, so I'm good. And then I felt that way until I also got the cops called on me for taking a morning walk through my neighborhood. And so even with things like police violence, it's like, well, maybe that's just in certain areas, but now we see it's like happening in, nice cities, and to younger people and to older people and people of all races. And it's almost like we should like pull together to fight these power institutions now before we almost have to like face the consequences of it spreading and affecting that many more later. Who knows how much later that will take, but it seems to be the case that, you know, at the end of the day, it does kind of hurt all of us in some way.
Absolutely. Thank you for that contribution. And as you said, to stop it, and it's already been, you know, not great for so long, and to put an end to that will make it better for everyone. So thank you.
Brittany, could you also just identify yourself? Sorry, not to put you back on the spot, but we do have people that probably don't know who you are, like Kyle and I do.
Oh yeah, so I'm Brittany. I'm a 4th year dental student with Libby and Kyle and a few others. I go by she, her. What else am I supposed to say?
That's great.
It. You nailed it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, and just the idea of like all supporting each other. So I think I just want to give an example, since we also have a video related to this. Does everybody think that like in queer spaces that people of color are also welcome? Like, for example, like let's say you're going out and it's like a gay club or whatever. Do you guys think, or do you all think that people of color are also seen as like, oh, okay, like we support you as well, like it's a very supportive environment, or not? Like, or does anybody have any personal experiences that they would want to share about that idea of supporting each other or lack thereof?
I mean, if I can add something to that.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So an example would be like, say, okay, like particularly in like the, you know, LGBT dating or whatever, like one of the things I've noticed is that, you know, when you're on dating apps, I feel like there's always like a stigma attached to people who are of color. They're always like kind of seen as a little bit less desirable, you know, like, oh, I'm not gonna date you because you're, you know, Hispanic or you're this or whatever, like you're not really my type. So I feel like some of that stuff also, I mean, it's very, very, very explicit actually. You know, I told that a couple of times. So, you know, I see that that's also like an issue, you know, but, and like my thinking about it too is, you know, why, I mean, if you weren't interested, that's like, there's a better way of saying that, but you don't have to actually explicitly say like, oh, like technically you're not really my type because of this, you know? So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, well, you know, we're kind of in the same boat in terms of like being in the same, maybe not the same experiences, but being, you know, marginalized. So it's like, why would you be further marginalizing, you know, a person of color, you know? That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, so so that's kind of been my experience as well in terms of like even though I'm Hispanic, I'm definitely, I look very white, but in terms of, oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. In terms of just people walking, talking the talk, but not walking the walk, right? So like every LGBT people are like, yeah, people of color, like you're like, you know, like we share similarities of like, you know, but I don't see that much action being taken to really like support each other in that way. And so I did want to show a video that Libby, you have as well, of something that happened really recently about it, like the most famous club I would say in the country, which is Roscoe's in Chicago, and a really well-known drag queen, which used to be known as T-Rex, Tranica Rex, right? But then she changed her name to T-Rex because of, you know, she got a lot of pushback. And because of that, T-Rex basically owns Roscoe's, this club, and she got to decide the lineup for this club and like all the drag queens that would participate and things like that. And as you can see, she got to hold a lot of power. And when I say like Roscoe's is one of the biggest places, like not just in Chicago, but like the country, I am not kidding. Like every time there's like a drag race show or something, like it's lined up blocks, you know what I mean? So the person that you'll hear speak is somebody who is, they're black, he's black, drag queen as well. and she became famous slowly but surely, but then her claim to fame was being part of like RuPaul's Drag Race, and that kind of like took her stardom like completely out of this world. And so you'll get to hear her experience of like being just a fledgling drag queen in Chicago and how she was treated differently once she was actually like super celebrity status. So Libby, if you wanted to play that.
I just also, if anyone wanted to comment, I just had an anonymous question that was chatted to me. And I think it kind of like hubs up to what Issa was bringing up before, and also speaks to intersectionality and how we view the LGBTQ community and then people's other identities as kind of putting them into separate groups. But someone was a little bit confused on using the terminology person of color versus Black, and I might not be the best person to speak on it, but I am aware of how that creates further divide, and like what's right and what's wrong, and how you should go about having these conversations and how you should address people. So if anyone has anything to say about how people should approach you know, talking about people's identities without like kind of being politically correct or not offending them by whatever, kind of, like I said, it hubs up on what Issa said about like passing and how you can kind of slide in and out of different groups just because we so easily judge people on their appearance, just, you know, flip of a switch.
So this is like not specifically what you were talking about, but I've recently been seeing this wave of people who want to start normalizing, BIPOC. So it looks like BIPOC. So I was super confused for a long time, but it puts emphasis on Black and Indigenous people, and then POC because Black and Indigenous people actually have higher crime rate, like sexual assault rates of hate crimes. And so, and I think they have like a smaller passing community as well, which plays a huge part in it. But I do know that POC tends to be a more all-encompassing term, tends to be more inclusive, and oftentimes overlooks the specific experience of being Black or Indigenous in America, where it's visible and you face a lot quicker stigmatization, I guess. So I thought that was interesting to throw into the mix too, the BIPOC and then the POC and Black people, and that kind of difference.
I will add to that to say that I don't think anyone should be scared of like using the term POC, because obviously like if you're a person of color, no matter what race or ethnicity, you are going to likely have a different experience than like a white person would. But I also agree with what Issa's saying with the reason that they tease out the BIPOC is because like I'm a person of color, but I know that my experience is a lot different than Black and Indigenous people, or even people who have like a darker skin tone than me. But I also know that my experience is different than say like my white counterparts who also identify within the LGBTQ community. So I think like POC is a big umbrella that identifies anyone who's not white basically, but then we do purposely tease out like the Black and Indigenous people because we know that they face higher rates of discrimination and violence and all those things. And so, yeah.
Great. Thank you guys for helping elucidate some of those terms. Libby, did you want to pull up that other video, that second one?
Yeah, sorry, Seb, I kind of got off track, but I wanted to address the question that had flown into
No, thank you for doing that. That was great.
I think that's always an important thing. Okay. Is this coming up? Yes.
Perfect.
All right, it's a little bit before. Let me see if I can get it. Here we go.
Two speakers, but so Shay, thank you so much for being here at this town hall that we're having this evening. I thought it was very important to have you a part of this conversation. You've been a part of Chicago Drag for a very long time and have experienced just about anything that we can kind of think of in these situations. First of all, I wanted to introduce you to our mediator, Shimmy, who is here to handle the conversations. We also have Taylor here as a representative from Berlin, and we have Brendan and Sean from Roscoe's. But yeah, go ahead and take the floor and just have a moment to speak.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here and be in this space and speak about my experiences. I think that this is a really good, start having these conversations, but, there's a lot of action that we need to do. So I'm just going to just directly address you, Ben. And I'm going to start off by saying that we started in this scene around the very same time together. And I was a member of Trinica's Most Wanted. I was a member of the cast at Berlin Drag Matinee and its inception when you took that over from Mistress Vanna and Anastasia. And I've had the opportunity to work with you at Milwaukee Prides and Dick's and all over. We had a very long-standing working relationship in my time as a drag queen in Chicago before I made it on the race. And for that very reason, that allowed you to exercise a certain amount of privilege over me in the scene. And at times when you felt as if I was being too bold, you used that and weaponized that against me to try and blacklist me and stop me from working. So you directly attacked my livelihood, which is an act of violence. And I need you to understand that today. I want to also speak to a very specific experience that I had with you, where we had already worked a show and were backstage with the staff. This was at Scarlet at the time that we were doing Trinica's Most Wanted. And I was the only person of color back there. It was you and Bryce and somebody else. And you had made a joke because at that time we would do cast numbers at the top of the show that for Black History Month, it would be funny as a number, as a cast, if we performed to Britney Spears' Slave for You, with me dressed as a slave while the rest of you whipped me. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay. I want you to know that that experience has stayed with me for a very long time because you were somebody that I considered a friend. And the fact that my hurt and my displeasure at being subjected to that and how I had to almost beg you for an apology really let me know where I stood to you, not just as a person, but as a person of color specifically. So fast forward to when Berlin Drag Matinee is in its, heyday, and I was regularly a rotation in the cast, and I was oftentimes booked at Naughty Little Cabaret prior to the show because drag was my livelihood. And I would come to the show, and oftentimes I would be doing 3 numbers while the rest of the girls were doing 2, making the same amount of money as everybody else. So in the lineup, I was always one of the first girls, probably second, and was honestly stretched thin through every performance, but it was my drag. I loved it. It gave me a thrill. I loved the audience. I loved the experience. However, there was one show in particular, which was the musical theater show, in which I was changing very rapidly for my second number. I didn't even have a space in the dressing room. I was getting ready in the back by the coats. And the stage manager, Abby, came down, asked me, Shay, how much longer do you need to get ready? I said, Abby, I need 30 seconds. And I heard her say to you up from the stairs, she needs 30 seconds. And I heard your voice. You heard her say that, and you announced my name to the audience. You directly tried to sabotage me in a show for stunts. You got into my head. And then upstairs on the mic, to further make a joke of me, say, oh, you had one job. Okay, I obviously was angry. I did my performance as usual. You mocked my anger after the performance by saying, we'll speak in my office because you're the only person that gets to hold the mic. And then after we had a discourse downstairs where I told you exactly how angry I was with you, how I felt that I was being mistreated by you, and how I felt like you weren't doing the same that you were requesting of the girls in the show to do, and it was not fair for you to treat me that way, that pricked your ego. And then you made sure that you blacklisted me in the community until I got on Drag Race. And then because I get on a larger platform, then all of a sudden it's like everything needs to be fun. But I need you to understand that even after that, you came for my daughters. And so even though we had conversations after I came back from filming Drag Race, I thought that the things with you and me were done. But then my daughters are still experiencing these microaggressions, and that comes right back to me. So for me, what I need from you is, I read your apology, but I want to see real concrete actions when it comes to producing your shows, when you're casting, making decisions at Drag Matinee. If you're going to yield every other week to a Black drag queen to host, I think that that is a fabulous idea. When it comes to producing, I think that you should get one of the girls. Bambi Coulee would be a perfect one to come and help you out with making those decisions, because I know that she is somebody that you have directly targeted, and I think that that would be great restitution for her. I just want to say in closing in this statement that the reason why I wanted to come in here and speak to you is because I've been gifted the opportunity to be on a platform that has lended a sense of validity to what I say. And I think that it's very important that people hear those stories, because I've worked with you closely and that is how you treated me. So I just want to encourage you to do better, because there's a lot of people that have been negatively affected by you, and a lot of those people are still hurting from the things that you did. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So just for context, just to give you the what happened the next day sort of thing, T-Rex, after like ruling the scene for God knows how long, it was actually fired from Roscoe's. So as far as making actionable steps forward, it starts all with a conversation and like really revealing what's going on, and hopefully little by little things can happen and change for the better.
For sure. Thanks, Seb. And going back to just thinking about that and like what Josue was saying earlier about, dating apps and things like that, I feel like another kind of power structure that has been around for a while and perpetuates some of these things is like in like the porn industry, like the fetishization of Black people and people of color. And it's that we have to think about how like in different aspects of LGBTQ society, there are these things that have been pervasive for a long time. And it's important, for people to dismantle things like that and, say that things like that are not okay, because it's dehumanizing and contributes to more racism and things like that. Great. Well, we're almost at 6 o'clock. Just one other kind of thing that I feel like might be a good thing to think about as we close out the session was just thinking about some other ways that we can contribute to anti-racism. One thing that I was thinking about was just kind of specifically as Columbia students, dental students, as living in Washington Heights, we're kind of lucky that we get to call that place our home for 4 years and serve the patients there. And I feel like I've heard classmates of mine or other people in the past like call Washington Heights or other areas of northern Manhattan like the hood, and other just kind of racist feeling towards this place where we really are lucky and have the privilege to live, learn, provide care. So kind of one thing that I'm looking to do is kind of contribute more regularly to Black businesses and other businesses in Northern Manhattan, Inwood, South Bronx. Just trying to think of ways to, you know, combat some of these systems, especially living in New York and in Northern Manhattan. I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas.
Hey, Kyle. Thanks so much for getting into that. I think, you know, oh, hi, I'm Peter, by the way. I'm a fourth-year student, pronouns him, his. So, you know, I think it's really important, something that you bring up is, you know, like what are actionable things we can do? I think that's so important, right? I mean, just like all the things that are going on these days, I think, you know, it's really like a human rights issues. And I love that people are getting organized, getting in the streets, writing to your local lawmakers. I think honestly, it's just been extremely positive to see that. I mean, obviously, we still have a long way to go, but I think it's just really encouraging. And you know, even last week, you know, I thought that was pretty incredible, landmark Supreme Court case. And I guess that was maybe something like intersectionality. Maybe it's a little bit of a stretch there, but you know, using the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to protect the rights of LGBTQ people in the workplace. I thought that was pretty incredible. And you know, I just feel like, you know, another like important thing, you know, not just advocacy there is, you know, and it's great people are voting as well. It's really important. But I think something else I was thinking about and like reading about was like the U.S. Census. And I know like it seems like really random here, but just hear me out for a quick second. Like the U.S. Census is every 10 years, and it's actually hugely important, even though it's like very low key. It's not really getting much attention, but it's used for allocating federal funds. And I feel like, you know, for us in Columbia, it actually affects us directly because one of the things that it actually funds is Medicaid, which actually, you know, most of our patients are Medicaid patients, and it directly affects them. And one thing I read that was really, really scary for me was that New York City in general, our response rate to the census is 60% when the national average is 75%. And it also hurts the communities of color, especially, who get this funding. And it's not just funding too, but it's also, you know, our representatives, like how many congressmen we get, how many electoral votes we get. And I don't know, it's just something I've been thinking about, like man, I know there's a lot of like efforts to make changes through protests and writing to the government, but I just thought that was something that was kind of bothering me too, especially because, you know, it's just the patients that we serve every day. And, you know, as healthcare providers, it's up to us to, you know, let our patients know things that can help them, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Peter. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas in that vein?
Yeah, I can add one more thing. I'll try to go kind of quick because I know we're a little bit over 6. My name's Abby. I'm a rising third-year dental student. My pronouns are she, her. So just like for a little bit of reference, right now I'm home for quarantine in Kentucky, so I'm in the South. Since the Pilates and workout studios have opened up, I've been teaching classes there, and I found something to be like something that's really important to me, and that you can apply this to like family members, friends, anyone, is like stop letting people slip up. Like when people say something, even if it's uncomfortable, don't just let it go. And you don't have to be mean, you don't have to be berating, like people aren't responsive to that. But especially in teaching these classes, like it's mainly older white Southern women, and like they're paying me to teach these classes. Like it's usually not my place to like disagree with them or say anything. Like when they talk about their like how they hate their husbands or whatever, I'm like, okay, like I'm sorry. But also being in Kentucky, there's a lot going on here, and a lot of people will like talk about the protests, and I found like you don't have to say like you're being racist, this is not okay. You can say things as simple as like, from our standpoint, we could never understand like the emotions that are going on, or just try to like provide some kind of empathy. And I think that it becomes really helpful when you just try to like nicely like stand up for things. So you don't have to be aggressive or anything like that. You can even just do it with empathy, but just like stop letting people slip up like that.
Just echoing what Abby just said. Sorry, Dan, were you just unmuted or was it the thing?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say something, but I can go after you.
I just got I'm just getting chats from people that don't want to talk, but they said almost the same thing. They said, I think something really important is to call people out when they say something wrong. They said like that. We can't be afraid to call people out. I think there's a lot of power in challenging someone else's thinking. At the end of the day, the person allowing it to happen is just as guilty as the person who's speaking up or doing it. So I wanted to share that.
I totally agree with that. I feel like that's why allies are so important. Like, not putting all the work on the marginalized people to create change because they're already marginalized. And so I think most of us, no matter how many oppressed groups we belong to, we still have some amount of privilege. So like leveraging that privilege to create change, I think it's really important. But I wanted to comment on the census thing that Peter was talking about. I totally get how like raising our voices, like voting, that sort of stuff is really important. But I also just want to acknowledge the fact that things like the census itself isn't even inclusive. And I think that goes back to like in the video, how it was saying, like, it's nice to, you know, like hire people here and do these things, but if we don't recognize that the actual system itself is what needs changing, then I don't think we're ever going to really reach the point of change that we want. So I think things like the census, like, I don't think they include anything on the census other than like male and female. And so it's like, how are we supposed to know what people who are trans or non-binary or gender diverse need if from something like the census, if the census doesn't even acknowledge that those people exist, right? And so I think just recognizing that even things like that are so systemically ingrained and structurally ingrained that it's like, we need to change the system if we want change and not just tell people. I mean, obviously, like the census, voting, all that is important, especially like Kentucky with the voter suppression, like, get out of here, that's ridiculous, like, we need to change that. But I think, especially as people, like I said, with the privilege, looking at the systems that are in place and how they serve you or don't serve the people that you know are marginalized, and just trying to tear it down from that aspect, I think is really important.
I also just wanted to add in my own comment, unrelated to Dan, just kind of my thoughts in just ending this discussion is, I know that a lot of people have offered up different ways to be different, be better, make a change. But I think personally, as being quarantined, I was kind of like, what the heck can I do? I'm in Tucson, Arizona. There's literally nothing happening. / there are protests, but it's 110 degrees out. Like, Corona's happening. How do I want to be better? And something that I just agreed upon with myself is I was like, I need to do two things. One of them being I need to challenge my own biases, because everybody has bias. And it could be toward any group. And I think it's especially important when you start to think about intersectionality. You might be like, oh, I'm fine with that person, but are you fine with a different version of that person if they fall into a different group? And beyond that, you might be fine with everyone, but kind of challenging ideas that are in your head that you think or have been taught are normal, whatever it may be, just consistently challenging your own biases and being like, is that actually true? What is that? And I think that that is a good place to make a foundation for you to then reach out and, as already discussed, go ahead and challenge other people's ideas, but make sure that you're consistently challenging your own. Don't ever accidentally get into the mindset that you yourself are okay. Everything that you're doing is fine. You're the best ally ever. Just make sure that you're always checking yourself. And the second thing is, I think it's really important to think in your own mind and to echo to the groups and people and, you know, family or other people that have relationships with, friends, significant others, whoever it may be. I think it's really important in this time to normalize the idea that you're allowed to change your mind and you're allowed to change your perspective. And that kind of hubs up off of what everyone said, but Abby just most recently brought it up, where you don't have to berate people. Give them that space, and not everyone is going to bite, but give people that space where they are able to change their mind, and they can be wrong, or whatever wrong is, they're able to adapt and understand and be better and be different. Those are just two things that I personally have been kind of trying to make sure that I'm doing by constantly challenging my own biases and normalizing the idea that you can be wrong and you are free to change your mind at any time.
That was great, Libby. And just relatedly, one thing that I found too to be helpful is sometimes, like in a group setting, certain things floating around are not as ideal. But if you feel like you're with someone that you're seeing you're disagreeing with, lean into that discomfort and maybe try have a personal one-on-one conversation with them. And I've acquaintance of mine who his political views is very different than me, and practically every day I'm trying to have individual conversations with them, again, not berating, but just maybe reframing their thoughts in a certain way, just to try and help and move things forward, but never forgetting to how important it is to not give up on that fight, especially when it comes to issues, such important issues as we were talking about today.
Great point, Kyle. I just want to chime in really quick. I'm Chris. I'm a D4, pronouns he, his. First of all, great conversations across the board. Abby, amazing point in terms of calling people out. I kind of just wanted to just share a little personal story in terms of how this can kind of go the opposite way also. I have gay friends. I'm a Black male who's straight, and I went to a gay club a few times with my friends, and actually other people would look at me as a straight male, and maybe because of my color, I'm not sure, looking at me as if I actually dislike gay people and would, turn negatively towards me, which is, obviously the complete opposite. And hopefully we all need to learn that we're all fighting the same fight. We're all fighting for equality, no matter what group we're in. There shouldn't be any marginalizing of any group because we're all in this together. And it kind of starts with, things that we can control here at Columbia, right? So this is our school. We pay a shit ton of money to be here. So why aren't conversations like this bigger? Why aren't we having these conversations more? Why are we only having one feelings day the first time we get on campus and then we don't talk about it again, right? This stuff that we're talking about is actually happening daily in our clinics, daily in our classrooms, in our hallways. Why aren't we talking about this more? So my question to everyone is, what can we do as members of our school to change this and to be on the same team? Because there's only about 25 of us in here, and I hopefully know that there are more people who think this way.
This actually kind of feeds really well. I messaged Libby to see if we had time to talk about this, but I've been doing the ASDA Snapchat, and today I was looking at information on how to make your practice LGBTQIA affirming and like how to be that type of dentist. And one of the things they mentioned was the HIV like panic that goes on. And I was just thinking a lot about what I've even heard since I've been at Columbia about the population that we live in and how people really don't love to treat HIV positive patients and how it's associated with homosexuality, which is not true, how it's associated with super lower. It's very much associated with Black and Hispanics more so than white people. It's associated with lower socioeconomic classes. And so I was thinking about that, and then also brought to mind like just all the demographics and epidemiology info were always just like thrown at us with no context, no higher level analysis of, well, why? Like what are like the preceding factors that make HIV more prevalent in Black communities? Like why? And we never really had that conversation why. So there's just a bunch of stigmas and stereotypes in which people just associate these groups of people with negatively with these negative diseases or negative things like that. And more bringing in higher level analysis about these demographics and epidemiology rather than just like split second deciding this population is most prevalent with this and then moving forward.
Thank you, Isa. Dan, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, sorry, I've been talking a lot, but I just wanted to say that that was part of why like identity came into existence. If we ever hear about like anyone in the LGBTQ community in dentistry in general, it's always in this like super stigmatized sense, and that's if ever, right? Like if we ever hear about it. And so I think that's what's so great about having a group like this is just like putting the face on identities that like some people have only ever heard of in like that negative sense. And I think especially as like future providers, even telling other providers that like, hey, it's not just your patients that are like queer or trans, it's also like your colleagues, your future bosses, like those people. And so sometimes I think just like putting a face to those identities and showing that, you know, LGBTQ people exist in more identities than just this like marginalized power dynamic of provider stuff. And so I think that's like just seeing all of you show up here to even talk about it, I think is a great start. And having identity at Columbia is great.
Thank you, Dan. Well, we're a few minutes over, 15 minutes over, but I think that the time spent, and this was a really fantastic conversation. I hope that you all enjoyed it. In answer to the question in the chat, yes, we can and should and will have more frequent meetings. And so appreciate the want for that, and definitely tell your other classmates going forward if you enjoyed the experience, you know, for them to join in and make it something more regular, because it's important that it is. So yeah, I think with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you again so much for being here today. And hopefully we'll be back together again in person soon.
And I just want to add to that in terms of having more frequent meetings. If anyone has anything that wants to be discussed or you think is a good, I don't know, a video or something that happens or a news article, journal, whatever it may be, that you would like to submit to us and have us kind of have a discussion like this about it, please feel free to share anything that might come across to you that you would want to have about these meetings.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you again. Happy Pride, and keep fighting the good fight.